Hello everyone and welcome to the Next Gen Manufacturing webinar series, proudly hosted by RSM Australia and Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre. Today's the second event in our series and it's based on succession planning and superannuation. My name's Andrew Sykes and I'll be your panel host. I'm a partner at RSM Australia and our National Technology Lead. A couple of housekeeping things before we kick off. We're going to keep your microphones on mute. That'll avoid any noise or feedback coming through. But if you have any questions, just enter them in the Q&A and we'll attend to those questions either through the seminar or by the end of the webinar. We're going to record this webinar today and it will be available after today's session. Today, our panel of speakers will provide you with valuable insight into superannuation and succession planning, in particular, how it relates to the manufacturing sector. We're going to have a look at how superannuation is involved in succession planning, and we'll give you some tips and tricks along the way. I'll now introduce our panel members to you. Joining us is Peter Revelis. Peter's a principal in the Business Advisory Division at RSM Sydney. He's an experienced accountant who understands the complexity of business operations, allowing him to provide valuable and practical insights to clients. Peter services all types of clients, including family groups, SMEs, corporates, listed, unlisted, and foreign, across various sectors such as manufacturing, technology, building and construction, professional services, health and aged care. Also with us from Perth is Katie Timms, who's the National Director of Superannuation and Self-Managed Superannuation Fund Services at RSM in Perth. Katie specialises in superannuation and has significant experience in all areas of self-managed super funds, including administration and compliance, asset acquisition, tax saving strategies, structural assistance, and estate planning. A variety of work comprises Katie's regular day, which ranges from helping farmers to transfer property out of super to the next generation, to advising company directors on their self-managed super fund and how it interacts with employee share schemes. The third member of our panel is Michael Sharp. Michael is the National Director for Industry at Advanced Manufacturing Growth Centre. AMGC is an initiative of the Australian Government. Its goal is to drive innovation, productivity and competitiveness across Australia. Mike has vast industrial experience, including nearly 3 decades at Sharp Brothers Australia, one of the nation's leading road companies. From 2004 to 2014, he served as Managing Director of the family business and has been involved with a range of industries, including infrastructure, health, medical research and manufacturing. So welcome team, we look forward to some great discussion today, some interesting times in the manufacturing sector as we've discussed, and some great economic news out today with Australia out of technical recession. So we'll kick off our panel discussion, and Michael, my first question is for you. Can you give us some examples of what you've seen in succession planning?
Oh, absolutely. It's such an important and vital role for the growth of the business, to give people confidence, but also, of course, for the business to continue. And family business in particular is a very strong sector of the Australian manufacturing scene. And so there's organisations out there like Family Business Australia that people should have a look at their website. And there's chapters in each and every state of Australia that people can engage with to gather advice. What we found is that one of the key drivers for manufacturing in Australia is collaboration. And it's important to say that the more people that can get out there and talk to other like-minded business people and gather advice and see how other business people are doing their own succession planning, this can be a great way of learning from others to implement in your own business. What we've done recently is just launched our 10 Ways to Succeed in Australian Manufacturing report. This is our latest publication, and it's available for free to download from the AMGC website. And it talks about such things as planning for change and leadership. So have a look at that, because that gives some great examples, and we've got case studies on the website to talk about that sort of thing. One example is a member we have down in Bega, a kitchen manufacturing firm. and succession there is ongoing. It's a family business. And when I was there last, they had just employed their latest apprentice, a young girl straight out of school. And she was being trained by her mentor at the business, who was getting ready to retire. And in this case, this was his 6th apprentice that he was able to train in the business. And he wished that he could keep going. He said, now with the robotics and automation and what's called Industry 4.0 for manufacturing, this digital transformation, including robotics and automation, he just is so excited about it, and to train this young girl to succeed his own position. And that's what he's done over the time. Now, on the family business side of things, one of the great things I've seen is that the children coming into the business will often go outside of Australia to a similar firm. So global collaboration. If you're say a kitchen manufacturer again, is there a kitchen manufacturing firm that you can relate to in California where your son or daughter might go and work for a year or two in that firm? And in a similar situation, you could do a barter, if you like, that the children in that firm in California could come to Australia. And so I've seen this work on several occasions. And I think it's a great example where the next generation can see how business works in other locations and bring that skill set to their own family business. I think there's a lot of merit in that.
Okay, so success in succession planning seems to be a lot of steps involved. So, Peter, how long before I want to have a succession event in my business do I need to start preparing the business for it?
Yeah, look, I think in short, the answer is as soon as possible. Many of my clients who at least approach us to undertake a succession type plan view the succession plan as a transaction. And it's not really a transaction. It's a process. And it takes a long time to get the process right. And there's quite a lot of consultation that goes into that. So, most clients will look at it and go, they're looking to retire in the next 2-3 years. I've heard some people come in and say, I'm out in 6 months type of thing. It doesn't really work that way, unfortunately, because if you've got clients who want to go ahead, they don't quite understand the value drivers of their business. That's the first thing. So they need some time to work out what it is that they can do to maximize their exit. So while I would say 5 years is a minimum, Andrew, I think even that's a stretch. I would say you'd need to be looking at around 8 years to get the right outcome.
Yeah, and probably, given that and the length of time involved, probably the most common question that we do here as accountants is that a costly exercise? Is this going to cost a lot?
Yeah, look, there are a few factors that come into cost. The main thing I would say is, and as accountants, as you rightly say, one of the first things we look at is what is the structure? So what is the fallout at the end of it all, and what is it going to render you? Now, most of us look at that and go, yep, it's, I've got to pay X amount of tax on that. As you'll hear from Katie, I'm sure there are ways of at least minimizing some of that along the way. But as part of what we do is we would be starting off any one of these journeys with a thorough review of the structure, understanding what the structure looks like. Now, if the structure is right and we can continue with that, it means that your cost is relatively minimal. But if it's not, and most times it's not, you haven't really started with the end in mind, you will essentially have to do something. And to get from a structure that you currently have to a structure that is going to be more accustomed to what you need, there is going to be a cost. Now, whether that's a consulting cost to get someone involved to look at it, provide you with the advice, or executing it, and that is going from one to the other, there is potentially an additional tax cost. Now, the longer you leave it, of course, the more value you build, the more expensive the tax cost can be. So it is really, really important to understand where you are. The other side of it as well, and I think it's very important to just make the comment, is that the longer you get down the road, as your successors are lining up to take your place, if you haven't had that process or started the process and got the process in train already, it's becoming more expensive for them to jump in as well. And so you would need to take into account the cost that it's going to land up costing them as well.
But I think there's argument for change, and people are approaching us at the Growth Centre about ways that they can invest in equipment and automation, robotics. So there is a trend to looking to other investments. And so people are saying, is super the right investment to use in my business? Should I be looking at other avenues? And I think that's where they can reach out to you guys at RSM and get some advice and guidance around the best opportunities for their super fund. The other thing is, again, back to collaboration. There's some great organisations all around the country where manufacturers can join and get involved. Organisations like the Geelong Manufacturing Council, or in Sydney, you have the Southern Strength Agile Manufacturers Network, and there's a wide variety of others all over the country. In addition, of course, to the Chambers of Commerce. But we have a great platform called the Manufacturing Academy, where I was able to go around the country and interview our members on the factory floor, and they've shared their experience about transforming their business to become a more advanced manufacturing firm. And so these are business leaders in Australia sharing their experience and their techniques to transform their business. So I'd encourage everyone to have a look at the Manufacturing Academy. It's a growing platform which we will incorporate more things around things like defence opportunities and the circular economy as well. But with the super side, I think it's vitally important to get the right advice, because every business is different, and particularly family business, no one knows the business like yourself, but it's important to reach out and get that guidance.
Yeah. So if we do have these businesses that have purchased a super and use their super fund to purchase their property along the way, Katie, can you tell me some of the things that you would consider in the transition of a business like that, where the building's owned by the super fund and then you want to transition the actual business ownership? How can we prepare for that?
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the times we get to this point and we kind of aren't in the right structure to be able to transition it, you know, tax effectively and cost effectively. And Peter's point about, you know, it requires, you know, I think 8 years, you said, Pete, to, you know, realistically successfully succession a business. And it's probably the same thing when we're looking at how do we actually structure a superannuation investment in property properly to make sure that we have the ability to do that. And, you know, one of the things that I always ask clients when we're starting to look at this sort of structure is, you know, at that acquisition point, what's the exit? So what's kind of the long-term plan for this property? You know, is it going to be, you know, do you want to retain this and rent it out in retirement? Is that going to be kind of your income yield? Is this going to be transitioned to the next generation? So is it an intergenerational transfer that we're looking at? Or do you want to give yourself the flexibility to be able to transition this to an external family succession, you know, whether it's an employee, whether it's, you know, a sale of the business, whatever it is. And those are the kind of questions that lead us down the path of which way should we be looking? You know, should we be looking at just direct super fund ownership straight in there, you know, whether we can use a borrowing or however else to structure it? Should we be looking at a unit trust type investment where, you know, over time we can sell units to the succession, you know, help hopefully managing capital gains and, you know, all of those considerations. So really, unfortunately, it's one of these questions, and people always equate me to a lawyer, but it depends, because if you haven't structured properly at the outset, you can create yourself a lot of complications down the track and maybe some tax that you weren't potentially prepared for. So what I always encourage people to do is, prior to doing anything, let's make sure that we're asking what's the exit strategy first, or what's the long-term plan? And if you don't know, how can we give ourselves as many options as possible to get it to the right person without costing us a fortune? We've also had some issues, I guess, in terms of making sure that you're not tying all of your retirement and, you know, planning into this one property, because I have had a couple of cases where someone's looked to buy the business and said, I don't want that premises that you've been using. You know, I think there's something better for us. And all of a sudden you're left with an asset that maybe is not going to help you, you know, in a nice, comfortable enjoyment phase of life.
Yeah, so don't necessarily assume that the building will go to the next owner of the business.
No, correct.
Yeah. So if we are looking at big asset acquisition like that, how can we maximise our superannuation balance while still working to achieve that building ownership?
Yeah, so we, for those who've been around as long as I have in superannuation, we used to call superannuation a funnel that, went this way, where it was really easy to get money into super and really difficult to get it out. Now we actually have the opposite. It's really, really difficult to get money into superannuation these days. So a lot of the answers I'm going to give are about planning early, but it's really, really important that you're maximising your super contributions for as long as you possibly can. There are obvious tax advantages to doing this. So if you're in a business where you're starting to see some good cash flow, maximising your contributions to give yourself a good foundation is really important, but also being aware of what are the funding and financing opportunities, that are available for you. Can you look at a super fund loan? They are out there. Commercial properties are one of the things that some of the banks will still lend for. Can you look at, a unit trust type structure, a joint venture structure? Are there people willing to invest into the business, into that, into that type of asset as well? So it's really about having an open mind and planning nice and early to make sure you're maximising that as much as possible.
Yeah. So what impact does the total superannuation balance have on our ability to be able to maximise that super contribution?
Yeah,
And
this is a
how can we
delightful.
prepare for that?
This is a delightful legislative change we've had, and I tell you what, it's creates the most headache in dealing with superannuation, because it's this concept of a cap that they brought in, which is where depending on what your total superannuation balance, so exactly what it sounds like, that your balance of all of your superannuation accounts, which for most of us means we've always got those lingerers that we haven't really kept track of, understanding what your total balance is, because there are different contribution opportunities depending on what your balance is. So it's really important, understanding and having the knowledge in the background to make sure, is your superannuation balance less than $500,000? Can you use what is actually pretty cool catch-up concessional contribution opportunity that's there for you now? Is it, do you have more than $1.6 million? How can we juggle that to try and make sure we're maximising our contributions? So all of these little pieces tie together to create either opportunities, or if you aren't prepared, you may miss the boat on being able to maximise money into what is potentially a tax-free environment for retirement.
Okay, so if I've got 1.6 million in my super fund, what does that mean for me?
Well done to you. Hopefully a comfortable retirement. But what it also means is you are no longer able to make non-concessional contributions to super. So it really limits your ability to put any more money into superannuation once you hit that $1.6 million cap. So if that's what's happened, as I say, good job, Sykesy. But then we'd be looking at, okay, what about your spouse? Have we maximised their contributions? Are there small business CGT concessions that we can be looking at when we're looking at that succession of business, because they're not part of that $1.6 million cap. So, can we look at a super fund borrowing instead? So there are some pretty cool things we can do for a super nerd. I think they're cool. But if we're not looking at it in advance, we're going to miss the boat.
So just clarifying some of the jargon there. So that non-concessional contribution, is that our ability to contribute $100,000 a year in after-tax money? So if we reach 1.6, we can no longer do that.
That's correct, but it's measured on 30 June every year. So it's not just a set and forget, you hit 1.6 and you're done, because as we saw this year, we had some clients that were in that position in 2019. And then unfortunately we've had, COVID and the Australian economy did take a little bit of a hit in June. And so all of a sudden we saw some people's balances drop. They were then eligible to make non-concessional contributions again, because it's measured at that static date in time at 30 June. So it's a moving target and one that you need to be across.
But we do have options like super fund borrowing, so it's still attainable to buy that building.
Absolutely. It's just about thinking outside of the square.
Yeah. So, Michael, if we move away from super a bit, and you mentioned collaboration before, it's really recognised as a key driver for advanced manufacturing. How does collaboration? How's it going to help a manufacturing business with their business planning?
Sure. I just think that you never stop learning. And so again, back to our report, the 10 ways to succeed in Australian manufacturing. Number 2 is a focus on leadership. And there's points here, like leading by example, which we all should do more of, and crafting a sense of us. How do you communicate to your team? And if you're talking about succession, it needs to be vocalised. You need to plan for these things.
Yep.
I touched on Family Business Australia. as an organisation, they have their monthly forum groups where they have teams of maybe 10 to 15 people, business leaders that meet on a regular basis that can collaborate and share their experience about what they're doing for their succession planning. So it's really important to get out there, but include the team so that everyone knows there is a journey that the business is on. That's a vital thing around leadership. So there's some great examples that we share on the AMGC website, and I'd encourage everyone to download that report.
Okay, so we can send a link around to that report after this session for everyone. I think that would be terrific. So continuing on that, how do you see succession in family manufacturing businesses work? Have you seen those situations where it hasn't been the family member that's a logical successor, and what does that look like? How are we handling the introduction of that independent leadership?
So I really think this comes down to having the right guidance and being able to seek out experienced people in the field. We have companies that have been around for, generations, like Beard, the bedding company, are now into their 5th generation. They have an external management team, the next generation coming involved and learning the ropes to take on the business over the time. The Varley Group in Newcastle, again, been going for 130 years. This is a firm that started when steam power was being introduced. And today they employ over 1,000 people around the country. So think of all the crises that they've been through. Here we are in the COVID crisis. But companies like I've described have gone through generational change and business crises like the Great Depression and World Wars and others. And yet they've been able to survive and thrive. One of the things we had when the crisis first hit was Beard. And one of the strengths they had was that they had leadership teams and manufacturing sites in every state of Australia. And that was important at the time because the government was saying to us, we need to have this capability, but it needs to be in each state because there is a risk that the states will shut down individually. And who would have thought? But we have obviously now seen that happen.
Yeah.
So succession planning needs to be ongoing. It's important to vocalize the plans and set the plans out so that everyone sees a clear picture moving forward. But yes, I still agree that it's vitally important to collaborate and reach out for experience and guidance. And I'm sure that you've got people at RSM that can offer that as well. Yeah,
which is where I'll throw back to you, Peter. When we're doing this succession planning and getting the right people is key, how do we identify that we get an independent view of that opinion that we do have the right people in place?
Yeah, sure. In fact, it goes back to something that Michael was mentioning. In fact, some of the thoughts on that, in particular with family businesses, emotion tends to get in the way. Someone's capabilities can be clouded by that emotion. And unfortunately, you do land up in a situation where, more often than not, the wrong person gets handed the reins. Doesn't necessarily mean that it's all doom and gloom. There is obviously ways that people can be developed, but sometimes you do need that independent view to say, well, actually, A doesn't quite meet with B. So having that independent view is great. In many instances, I've seen businesses set up independent advisory boards. Essentially, people from the business will sit on that board, and they will be surrounded by professional advisors. It's people who are close to them, understand them, are vested in seeing them succeed as well. So most businesses would appoint their accountants, their solicitors. Sometimes I've seen even a close friend or a very close acquaintance actually sit on these advisory boards. And what it does is it provides that other view where people are looking at the feedback channel and going, well, this is the information that's coming back to us about this person's performance, how they are managing their staff, how they're managing financial management, how they are developing in their technical knowledge of what we do, and then measuring it against formal testing and personality testing, cognitive testing, all that kind of stuff. And it really needs to marry up. So many people tend to fly under the radar and go, well, this is the type of person I am. And then they get handed the reins, and then all of a sudden the facade's gone. And so it's about finding that very happy medium and the balance, of course, but getting someone who's prepared to find out the truth is very important. You're only going to get that with an independent view more than anything.
And Michael, that really resonates with the idea that you put forward before of getting family members to go and work in other like businesses, and particularly internationally, bringing some of those outside ideas in. If we wanted to do that, how would we facilitate something like that?
I'm sure there's things that Family Business Australia would offer, but I'm happy for people to reach out to us at AMGC, and if I can facilitate those sort of introductions, I'm very happy to. We've got a growing membership base. It's completely free to join the Growth Centre. So we've now got over 3,000 members, and as of this year, everyone suddenly is talking about manufacturing, which is fantastic.
It's good to have it at the front of the conversation now, isn't it?
We no longer call it the manufacturing sector. We call it our nation's capability. What are we capable as a country of producing and making and exporting to the world? This is the future for Australia.
Yep, very, very right you are. So, Katie, we've had a question come in relation to super, and you may or may not be able to answer this, but it's sort of really, saying how can we, the average punter, tap into super funds to build various facilities or infrastructure that is desperately needed if we have the sites available? So I suppose that's really asking, what kind of assets can we buy in super?
Yeah, that's a tricky one to answer. I think we'd all love to get some hands on the money that's in the retail and industry or the APRA regulated funds. However, that's incredibly difficult to do. I think self-managed super funds, and we do have quite a lot of them, do look at these kind of property syndicate style investments, which is possibly what we're talking about here. So getting 10 or so super funds, or probably more depending on how much you needed, into a unit trust or a syndicate, doing the development, building the facility that's needed, and then paying back a rental yield or that sort of thing. They are unfortunately, as an average punter, that would be quite difficult to do. You would need to get some advice around that. There would be some financial services matters involved in there, so getting some financial advice as well. But it is something that super funds do like to do. It's a way of getting into the property market without sort of overcapitalizing, and having all of their assets tied up. It's a little bit more of a liquid investment. So it is something we see people being interested in. It's just finding the right sort of the manager and syndication group to look to run that for you.
Or that could be, as Michael mentioned, getting involved in collaboration in business and joining your local chamber and manufacturing group, etc., to get those contacts. What other assets? We're all familiar with buying a building. What else can we buy that's relevant in a super fund? Can we buy manufacturing equipment with our super fund?
It depends, which is everyone's least favorite answer from me. Look, but the realistic answer is it depends on who's going to use it. So can you buy manufacturing equipment that you then want to use in your own business? The short answer to that is no. Even if you want to pay market rates for it, even if you want to do that, you can't. But you can buy manufacturing equipment and lease it to an unrelated business. That is absolutely something you can do. It's tricky, and your auditor's possibly going to ask a few questions and ask you for some documentation on how you can do that. But you absolutely can, buy a particular piece of manufacturing equipment and lease it out to other people. We've certainly had some of our clients go down that path where they've sort of said, look, this is a bit of a niche piece of equipment. We think there's value in leasing it out because, it's hard for people to be able to afford it. And they've had some really good returns in that. So as long as you're not using it in your own business, or, it's not a relative that you're trying to provide it to, yeah, you can absolutely explore that.
Excellent. And just a reminder that we do have our Q&A button there. If you want to click on that, and we'll answer any questions as they come up. So Katie, we're continuing on the super theme and succession. What are some of the things that we should consider to protect our assets in super, both before a succession event and afterwards?
Yeah, so well, interestingly enough, assets held in superannuation are actually protected from any sort of bankruptcy or administration. So even though it's hopefully not something that comes up too often in succession, it really is something that's important to think about, particularly where you are looking at those type of investments and asset structures, in that anything that you hold in your superannuation fund is protected. Having said that, the most important thing that you can do is to make sure that if you're looking at a self-managed super fund, you have a separate sole purpose corporate trustee that acts for that. Now, as I say, even though you are protected, if you have a company that's acting as trustee of your superannuation fund, that's also your trading company, or it's the trustee of your business trust or something like that, I can tell you that what the insolvency guides do, because I've had our own insolvency guides do this, they do a search and they will scoop up all of the assets that are held in that company name, and then it's up to you to evidence and prove that no, even though it's held in the company name, it's actually held on trust for my superannuation fund, and you can't have it. And if you can't prove that, it's very, very difficult to prize it out of their hands, to give yourself that protection that you want. So it's really, really important that you get that structuring right up front to give yourself protection while you're in business and while you're starting down that succession path. And I guess the other thing to really keep in mind when you're starting to look at succession and when you're looking, particularly if we're looking at transitioning a business asset or, that kind of structure to the next, whether it's the next generation, is to treat it as it is a business deal. So make sure that if you are providing financing, that you're registering mortgages. If you are slowly transitioning investments, make sure that you've got documentation in place. Make sure you're registering an interest on the PPSR, even if you think it's not necessary, because unfortunately, if things go bad and you haven't protected yourself, you could be putting at risk your retirement, the time of life that was supposed to be fun, up at risk as well.
So that would seem to be particularly important where we have a family succession and there's some vendor finance involved. So we're still doing that even if it's family involved.
Almost more so if it's family, which sounds ridiculous, but unfortunately when you have fights, if you're having a fight with a business partner, it's sometimes less personal than if you get into a dispute with a family member, and 9 times out of 10 what we see is that if you've provided vendor finance or anything like that to a family member, the first response is, I don't need to do that, it's my kids, everything's going to be fine, and unfortunately they're the cases where it is not. So making sure that everyone is dealing exactly on an arm's length basis, that would you actually enter into that deal with with a business partner that you're trying to do with your son? If not, then you shouldn't be doing it. So registering mortgages, registering interest on the PPSR, charging market interest rates if it's vendor finance, all of those sort of things should absolutely be there, regardless of who it is.
Yeah. So you mentioned business partners, Peter. If I could ask you, quite often we don't have 100% ownership. You may have a major owner who wants to have a succession plan. How are we dealing with the minority business ownership in a succession plan?
Yeah, it's a tough one because a lot of the time when planning for succession, you may choose to tie in a lot of your employees and implement share scheme arrangements and things like that. So you could very easily land up with a whole bunch of business owners, whether you like it or not. They are minorities, and they certainly do have rights. So it needs to be dealt with a little bit of. It needs to be dealt with early. At first, if I can say, if there isn't a shareholders agreement in place, that is absolutely something you'd need to get put in place to begin with. What it really is it sets out a bunch of rules, whether that is how do I exit, how do I retire, how do I value what I've got. And more often than not, the reason for that is because the minority shareholder will know that when it's time for you to exit, the one question they are going to ask is, what are my shares worth to you? And that is one thing you do not want to be stuck with when you've got a potential purchaser on the other side. That's your retirement plan, and you've got these minority shareholders in the background. So very important to get the rules set out early, and as well getting alignment across what that might mean. It could give consideration to things like what is an acceptable valuation method. Everyone's aligned in that respect from the start. Things like keeping a focus on the business, not on how do we get out. And then it just will give you that additional bit of confidence and comfort to know that there's always a way out and there's a worst case scenario based on what's in front of you.
Yeah, in practice, I've seen that shareholders' agreements tend to stop arguments because there's a set of rules that everyone can refer to in a dispute. So putting all of this together, there is some cost to it. Michael, grants can provide funding for some of what's required. What's some of the ways that AMCG can help manufacturing companies access all types of grants, and not just succession ones, but the grants that are available?
Yeah, and there is a growing amount of grants coming online following the federal budget. We also have the state budgets going on. I know the New South Wales budget is November the 17th. So in AMGC, we got an additional $30 million funding to back projects. So I'd encourage everyone to have a look at the projects that we've been doing on the AMGC website, around 82 projects that are highly successful, where they have adopted new technologies around automation, robotics, new material science, some great case studies on those projects, and those there'll be new offerings for funding that companies can apply for in the coming weeks. So have a look on the website and keep in touch with us at AMGC on that. In addition, you've got things like the new Australian Business Growth Fund, and that's a combination that the Federal Treasurer has just announced, where the federal government is investing money alongside the 4 major banks to look at investing in Australian industry. So there'll be more information coming on that in the coming weeks as well. The other one I would point manufacturers to is the Manufacturing Modernisation Fund. Now, this is the round 2. Last time it was massively oversubscribed, which I think is a great thing. It demonstrates to me that manufacturers are wanting to invest in capital equipment and invest in machinery for their business. This is round 2, $52 million for businesses to have co-investment from the federal government to invest in machinery like robotics and automation, smart sensing and other technology to drive their business forward. I would follow up though by saying that I always encourage people to reach out to the Entrepreneurs Program. They have the Growth Fund and other initiatives to support small to medium enterprises, those from 1.5 million to 100 million turnover, where people can engage with the programs, be connected to industry leaders to support their growth plans. And it's just a great program that many of our members are engaged with right across Australia. So yeah, a growing amount of support for Australian industry, and look forward to being involved with all of that.
Excellent. So, Peter, if we look at that succession journey, I mean, we've dealt with cost and some of the issues around it. If we wanted to get started, who's involved? What's our ideal team to get this happening?
Yeah, it's a good question, Andrew, because I think there is no one answer. It is very much a multidisciplinary approach. It shouldn't remain static either throughout the process. As I said, this is a long process. People should be able to opt in, opt out as you need, and the business owner themselves need to be involved in that. And given the fact that they are part of the process, they are the ones who should be understanding exactly what they need, when they need it, and applying it appropriately. So having good advisors though around you is paramount. You can't underestimate the value that you get from good advice. Having strong and coherent financial, legal, even commercial advice through the process, having that independent voice in your ear is going to be extremely important, no matter who that is. But above all, no matter what happens, you do need to ensure that there is one person who is put in the middle of all of this to facilitate it. They need to understand absolutely everything that happens in the succession piece. It's not enough to just have all these people around the table and everybody's working on their own piece. You need one person in the center who understands, who maybe not necessarily needs to understand the nitty gritty of everyone's role, but at least someone who has a broader understanding about what piece needs to be dealt with now and what are the most important aspects of that, and then help move that along and make sure that it is dealt with both efficiently and effectively. Because there's no point in getting through this whole process and then you land up in a protracted legal battle with some of your minority shareholders, a family battle because your estate plan is not dealt with. You can't take it with you, so you really need to deal with all of this stuff long before. So getting the team right, it needs to be done right from the start.
Yeah, that's excellent. And just a reminder that if we do have any questions, if we can enter them into the Q&A, we do have time to field any questions. Peter, just a question for you. Difference between succession and in terms of family members versus trade sale or IPO. How should we operate when we're looking to sell versus hand over to family members?
That's very important, because I think as part of the initial process of setting up your succession plan, I think one of the main points, or one of the main starting points, is to identify who your potential suitors are. It makes it very important to understand what your business should look like as you move forward. If it's going to go to family members, the dynamics change a little bit. You sometimes need to deal with, and I think Katie alluded to it earlier, you might have non-working siblings. You may have divorces in the family. There are lots of things that come into play when you're dealing with family that you would need to place a lot of emphasis on as part of your succession plan. Whereas if you go for a trade sale or IPO or something to that effect, that tends to fall away. What you tend to need to work on is, am I the key individual? Am I the key person in this business? Because if you are, that's going to come at a discount. You really need to be able to step away, and everything needs to continue as if you were never there. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is making sure you understand what is underpinning the value of your business and building on that, because that's where you are going to maximize value. Are you positioning yourself to maximize value? That's where you need to go in that respect.
Well, that is terrific, team. And Peter, Michael, Katie, thank you for your time this afternoon. We don't have any further questions that have come through. So I would like to thank everyone who's attended our webinar, and we will say goodbye from here. So thank you from RSM, and thank you from AMGC.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.